Fruit by the Carbon by Dan, Brett, and Jakob. You may remember a time back in elementary school when one day the teacher or another student brought in Mr. Sketch markers. There wasn't anything so special about them until you realized that the sunflower you drew smelled like lemons. After that, whoever had the scented markers became just a little bit cooler than everyone else. Those markers were introduced in 1965 by the Sanford Manufacturing Company and are now owned by Newell Rubbermaid. The markers included the typical fruity scents such as cherry, apple, grape, and lemon. In addition, they have now added some more out there flavors, such as lobster bisque and nacho cheese. I don't know what fruits those come from, but I'm willing to try it. The thing which gives scented markers their scents are esters. Esters are a functional group which is very common in nature. They are a major component of the odors and flavor of fruits. Single esters, which closely approximate the natural scents, are added to products such as markers in order to increase their odor. An interesting situation is that due to low boiling points, esters evaporate and need to be re-added to foods in order to keep the food tasting fresh. Despite the esters being added sometimes being chemically identical to those from the natural foods, the esters have to be labeled as additives. A quick bit of history. The term ester was coined in 1848 by German chemist Leopold Gmelin. The term itself is possibly a contraction of acetic ether, which itself was first synthesized in 1759 by Count de Largois. Perhaps the most well-known method of making esters today is the Fischer esterification, which was invented in 1895 by Emil Fischer and Arthur Speer. Many students, including those at Purdue, perform this experiment in organic chemistry labs. So how do we smell esters, and why do they smell so good? As you can see with ethyl butyrate, which is used for pineapple scents, esters are unable to act as hydrogen bond donors, but can act as hydrogen bond acceptors. Due to this, the intermolecular forces are weak enough that the esters can easily pass into the gas phase and be smelled through our noses. The reasons humans enjoy the odors of esters has an evolutionary component to it. By having their fruit smell pleasant to animals, plants would encourage those animals to eat the fruits. When the fruits come out the other end, the seeds would be planted in a new location and reproduce. Animals would also evolve to enjoy the smell of those esters, since the natural sources of those esters were fruits which provided safe and nutritious food.
All right, thank you, Brett. Let me go on to a little more detail about why we smell in the first place. So, when we smell, it's kind of a different kind of sense that we have compared to, let's say, touch, see, or feel. Because when we smell, we're really just breathing in chemicals in from the air that then are, reached to the back of our nose, which then we interpret it. So these chemicals are sometimes called odorants because they have a certain odor with them, which will then trigger a response in what's called the olfactory bulb in the back of your nostril. And when you breathe in, you then get a lot more of these odorants into the back of your nostril, which will cause a neurological response in your brain to interpret that. And each odorant that we smell is actually from the formation of a chemical reaction. Either from that being from something going from a solid to a gaseous phase or a liquid to a gaseous phase, we then smell the gas itself, or a certain type of reaction will take place and we will smell things after. It's also a good sign during a chemical reaction or when we're in lab. If we smell something, we then recognize that as a chemical reaction has occurred. And so now that we talk about the sense of smell, let's talk about a couple of the common types of fragrances we see of esters that they use widely in both markers and inside the food industry. So as we see here, we see a lot of different fragrances. And a lot of fragrances that are used in the marker business are single esters. So for example, coffee can have upwards of 200 esters to make that specific fragrance. We don't typically see that in markers because it's very hard to replicate and costs a lot of money overall to make just that one type of smell. So what they like to use is like just a single type of ester as shown before us. For example, in our lab, we did in the third week of the semester, we did a lab where we formed benzyl acetate, which formed the scent of peach. And it was honestly a lovely lab that we all enjoyed. That's kind of one of the reasons why we wanted to do a more in-depth analysis of what fragrances are and how they affect pens and pencils and markers that are smelly. I'll pass it on to
And here we can see the reaction mechanism for the ester fisterification. As you can see, the reaction mechanism is acid catalyzed. It starts off by taking acid and protonating the carbonyl oxygen. That then leads to a more electrophilic carbonyl carbon, which is then attacked by the alcohol in the reaction. That then does a proton transfer, and from that proton transfer we then have water, which is a great leaving group, so it leaves, and then the acid is regenerated, showing that it is in fact acid catalyzed, and we're left with our ester. Some quick notes on ester fisterification. The reaction must be dry. If we go back to the reaction, we can see that water can in fact act as an alcohol as well. So if there is water present in the reaction, it will severely destroy yields. The majority of the time, the acid catalysts that are used, in addition to increasing the rate of reaction, also keep the reaction dry, such as concentrated sulfuric acid or hydrogen chloride gas. Continuous drying of the reaction also drives the forward reaction due to Le Chatelier's principle, because water is produced in the reaction, as we can see. So taking that water out drives the forward reaction. Lastly, aromatic esters can be hard to form through Fischer esterification because things such as phenol react really slowly in ester fisterification. They don't have favorable kinetics. So instead, an acid chloride can be used. The chlorine is a better electron withdrawing group than the hydroxy group in the acid. Thus, it makes the carbonyl carbon even more electrophilic, allowing for things such as phenol then to attack that carbonyl carbon. Additionally, the chlorine is a good leaving group.
So let me discuss a little bit more in depth about the health downsides of smelling markers. So scented markers are actually a form of inhalant. And inhalants can cause brain damage because what they do is they cut off oxygen from the brain when they are inhaled. And these inhalants can lead to foreign chemicals entering the bloodstream, which will then give you a semi-high, which is what they refer to it, which can cause some side effects. So the biggest thing you have to be concerned about when talking about scented markers and inhalants is long-term exposure. This can lead to brain cells dying, muscle spasms, liver and kidney damage, and a lot of other terrible side effects. But for the case of scented markers, they're not really as strong of an inhalant as some of the drugs that are seen out there. So short-term exposure to smelling markers has shown only like some minor side effects such as dizziness, but are not really of high enough concern because they're not really that strong of a drug per se.
There are various environmental impacts of esters. The majority of them can be harmless in most instances, but the phthalic acid esters can be really harmful. These esters are created from derivatives of phthalic acid, which is pictured here below. They're known as endocrine distributing chemicals, which means that the effects environmentally can be seen after long exposure. Now that we've looked at esters in respect to the smelling markers, we'd like to conclude by looking at the world of esters and how they're used in our everyday life. First of all, they can replace petroleum ingredients in skincare products. They're also used in pharmaceuticals, most notably aspirin, which you can see here in the bottom right corner. They're also used as solvents like ethyl acetate, butyl acetate. They're also used as emulsifiers, plexiglass, textiles, dyes, and flame retardants. Here's our work cited. Thanks for watching.